Pilgrim United Church of Christ occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Payo Cowicham, known as the Luiseños today. Since time immemorial, the Ataxim lived in harmony with the land and were stewards of their natural environment. We honor their history and their continued presence in their native land, and pay our respects to the Luiseño as they continue to be a vital force in our region. Along with this effort of acknowledgement, we strive to develop a deeper understanding and appreciation for the Luiseño people. Please now give your attention to the piano, where Amy Wrench will offer our prelude to worship. Beautiful, thank you so much. I am definitely in the spirit of worship now, thank you. We are an active and an activist church, and so we're going to begin with a few announcements about how you can get involved. First of all, as we all know, the federal government is shut down and they have deliberately withheld payments for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program that feeds the neediest members of our community. And so our commodities distribution will be enhanced by your contributions. So if you can make a contribution to the Good Samaritan Fund, those resources in $25 increments will help us provide certificates, grocery store certificates, so that the families that come can buy a turkey or supplement their Thanksgiving dinner. Mark has other announcement about that.
Well, I would say either Good Samaritan or just food distribution, because we have a separate account for food distribution too. So either one of those would work, food distribution or Good Samaritan. I just wanted to comment, yes, our food distribution is on the 18th, is Tuesday, third Tuesday. And we have requested more food from the food bank, and they've going to give us a little more food. So we anticipate that we might have over 70 families. Our average has been around 60 families, but we think we might have about 70. So that's what Madison is saying. We're trying to plan for giving out, say, I said $20 gift certificates, but $20 cards for all 70 of those people, so that they can buy a turkey. We did not get turkeys. They can't guarantee us getting a turkey, so we didn't get them. So yeah, go ahead and if you feel like it, donate to food distribution or Good Samaritan. We'll put it in the food distribution account. We'll get those cards, and then Tuesday the 18th, we'll need a lot of volunteers because we'll be bagging up a lot more food. We'll be bagging up more food than we usually bag up, and then trying to distribute to that number of families. So we'll see what happens. We never know because people don't sign up ahead of time. We just don't know who's going to show up. But we expect a larger crowd.
Thank you, Mark. Also, Judy Wallace has an announcement.
Good morning. Before I make my announcement, as the daughter of a veteran, I would just like to thank those veterans who are here with us and those who are online. Thank you for your service to our country. Now my announcement. I am here as I'm part of a team, and that team consists of Gail Shockley and Ken Breeding and Cindy Baker. And we have been working to prepare the infant toddler space over at the Children's Center. We have been sanding and priming and painting the cabinets there. And we've also been assessing, and we have assessed that we need more hands to help, and this is where you come in. If you would like to join our team of doing a variety of tasks, we would really appreciate your help, and that can include everything from taking down blinds that are there to then reinstall new blinds, putting hardware on cabinets that never had hardware before, so getting them perfect for the perfectionists among us, that would be awesome. If you can stand on a small step stool to reach up high to get to some places, we would appreciate that. But if you can't stand on a step stool, that's fine. There's lots of work to be done there. So we have designated Mondays, starting tomorrow, every Monday from now until the end of December, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. If you can help out on any of those Mondays, all of those Mondays, from 10 till 2 or a portion of that time, we will take your hardworking hands. Please see Gail on the patio after the service. She has a sign-up sheet. She'll collect your name and your email and your telephone number, and then we'll reach out from there. But please, we really appreciate any kind of hands we can get. Thank you.
Continuing on with the Helping Our Neighbors theme, Community Resource Center in Encinitas is also collecting food to enhance their food distribution. So if you're down Encinitas Way and have some extra canned goods, please contact or drop by Community Resource Center. We have a very special guest today, Robert Scheer and Narda Zakino. Stand up so everyone can see you. Robert Scheer is a good friend of our church. He is the editor-in-chief publisher of ScheerPost.com. If you haven't found ScheerPost.com, it's a great source of accurate, truthful, and unflinching information. And so we encourage you to go there. But Robert will be speaking with us in our after-church forum on the state of our democracy 1 year later. So we look forward to that. Please go out to the coffee time. We've enhanced it a little bit to sustain you through the forum. So please go out and come back in, and let's stay for the forum. If you're online, the forum will continue on this same bat channel a little bit later at that time. But it'll also be posted on our YouTube as well as the ScheerPost YouTube. And so have your friends to watch it there if they missed it today. Our environmental justice team will meet after church next Sunday, so please put that on your calendar as well. Right now, we would like to recognize all of our visitors. If you are visiting with us today, we'd just like you to stand up so we can see who you are. We're not going to embarrass you. Just please stand. Please stand. Wonderful, wonderful. Now remain standing because I want our members who are near you to reach out and make you feel special welcome here at Pilgrim Church. Let's remain standing as we join in our song of fellowship. You are well. Oh, happy. All right. Everybody. You are welcome here, right who you are, no matter where you are on life's journey. You are welcome here, no matter who you are. Come and join with us. We're united in the Church of Christ. We're united in the Church of Christ. Amen. You may be seated, and now you're in the capable hands of Diane Danner, our liturgist for today.
Good morning. Will you please join me in the congregational affirmation, followed by the call to community. We are an open and affirming community within the United Church of Christ, with the progressive theology, a commitment to spiritual growth, and a passion for social justice. God, you seek us. Even when we feel lost and alone. You not only find us, you celebrate. God wants us to find each other. Celebrate God. If you are able, would you please stand for our morning hymn for the healing of the nations.
Good morning, kids. Would all the children please come forward? All the children please come forward. Come on, kiddos. Welcome, welcome. Gather round, gather round. We're going to play a game today. We're going to play a fun game today. All right, everybody. Oh, come on, come on. Isn't it wonderful to see so many children in our church? I tell you, I've been to churches that have 500, 700 people and no children. So we are so happy that you are all here. We're so happy that you're all here. Okay, when I was your age, I used to play a game, and it's called hide and go seek. Anybody play hide and go seek? Yeah, everybody know how to play hide and go seek? Okay, now, the boundary of the game is this row and anywhere up there, okay? Just right up here, all right? Now, I'm going to close my eyes, and then I want you guys to hide, okay? 1, 2, 3. All right. Okay. Up. They don't know how to play the game. Okay, let me see where wait a minute. I see a shoe. And God got you too. All right, you're tag. All right, go sit down the steps. Let's see, where is anybody else? I don't see anybody else. Oh, wait a minute. Hey, there you are. I got you. All right, go sit down. Whoa! Go sit down. Tag. All right, tag. Go sit down. Okay. Tag, I got you too. Okay. Anybody in here? Nope. All right. Okay. All right. That's it. Shh. You're not supposed to tell on each other. Okay. Look, how many we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, that's enough. No. You know what? I think this is enough. I don't want to look for anybody else. I'm tired. You know what? I'm not looking anymore. But you know who is looking? You know who's still looking?
God.
God is still looking. I might be satisfied that I got most of you, but God is looking for the one that's left out. Gotcha! And so Jesus told a story about sheep, that they were all together, but one of them went stray. Yeah.
He left the 99 to go get the one.
That's right. And that's the way most people do. You know, if I got 9 out of 10 of you guys, I mean, you're not my kids, but if I got 9 out of 10 of you guys, I did a pretty good job. But pretty good is not good enough for God. God wants us to find everybody. Okay? So let's remember, don't leave anybody behind. Even if just one, and we've all got what we need, go and find that one lost sheep. All right? And this was our lost sheep? Okay. All right, off to Sunday school. We're going to have our stewardship moment first.
Good morning, pilgrims. I'm Richard Burton with the stewardship team. I grew up in a relatively conservative church. I think probably a lot of us probably did. Knowing that I was gay from a young age, I could never understand why God hated me so much. And my fellow church members, if they knew who I really was, would hate me as well. So as a young man, I lost my faith entirely. More than a decade later, I had a spiritual reawakening. I needed to find a church where I could not only be myself, but I also needed a space which would allow me to meld my spiritual side with logic and reasoning. A place which had set aside the kind of dogma and unwelcoming nature which was present in the church that I grew up in. Pilgrim offers me a space to worship and explore the divine without having to park my brain at the door. A space where all of our neighbors, regardless of race or national origin, regardless of sexual orientation or identity, are seen as fellow children of God. Indeed, Pilgrim changed my perspective on what a church could, and in some ways should be. Pilgrim is a place where I'm not only welcomed as a member of the LGBTQ+ community, but also affirmed as the person God made me to be. This is a community, this is a community which reaches out and cares about our immigrant brothers and sisters. We want to lift up those who are financially struggling and face housing instability. And we seek the right for women to have bodily autonomy. We hear the cries of the oppressed, and we offer our support as best we can. That support comes from all of us as a community. This outreach is only possible because of you. We are ever grateful to those who can physically be there for food distributions, or to march in the Pride Parade, or those who can take part in any number of the ministries Pilgrim offers. But there's another place where that outreach becomes possible: your financial support. I would ask for you to take a moment to reflect on how Pilgrim is important to you. How has this place changed your life, or how you've seen it change others? We ask for your pledges so that Pilgrim may continue to make those impactful changes for years to come. We have a sizable goal this year, but with your love and support, I feel confident that goal will be met. Most of you should have received a letter and pledge card. If you have not, they're available in the narthex, and there's a collection box there that you can place your pledges into. Please pledge as you are able. Thank you, and God bless.
Will you join me in the unison prayer of confession? Holy One, in a world that heaps gifts on the gifted and honors on the honorable, you seek out the least, the outcast, and the lost in our world. You seek the ones that no one is seeking. What comfort there is in just knowing you care for each of your children. Amen. Thank you. Now it's time for our mindfulness bell while we spend a few moments in quiet meditation.
We come now to a time in our service in which we open our lives to share what has given us joy and what has caused us concern. And then the others will open their hearts to receive your joy and to celebrate with you, or to receive your sorrow or your concern and to mourn with you, or to shoulder that burden with you. And so we'll come to you, and we ask that you give your first and last name so we'll know for whom to pray. But speak now your joys and your concerns. And if you are online, please put your joy or concern in the chat, and we will share it when we're finished here with the congregation. prayer. Holy God, we are thankful that we have the opportunity to gather in a place of comfort and care and concern and safety and peace that we call Pilgrim Church. Sometimes we carry these burdens all week long for just the opportunity to share them here. And sometimes we can barely contain our joy and don't know who to tell until we arrive within these doors. We pray for those who have lost loved ones, especially young mothers, those of youthful age. We pray for challenging diagnoses and treatments, for speedy recovery from surgery. You have gifted us with these magnificent bodies that have the capacity within them to heal. But we pray for the medical professionals who attend to us. May their skills be sharp and their attention complete. We pray for our world, places of war and conflict driven by nothing but pure greed, just greed. Help us to learn to live in peace together. And bless our country as we struggle and strive with a way to live together as we move forward with all of our diversity and all of our differences. Let us not neglect the great gifts of our nation and the tremendous resources, for you have reminded us that to whom more is given, more is expected. So help us live up to the bounty of your promise to us, your provision to us, and use the gifts and the resources of this nation to bless the world. Continue to bless our church that we might be that light, that beacon light, shining the light of your love in this corner of your creation. This is our prayer. Amen.
The Parable of the Lost Sheep is part of a trio of stories, including the Parable of the Lost Coin and the Lost Son, that amplify the personal dimension of divine love. The shepherd is a stand-in for God, making this story one of the most tender and compassionate stories in the New Testament. Hear the ancient voices in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, verses 12 to 13. What do you think? If a shepherd has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go in search of the one that went astray? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 that never went astray. Here ends the reading.
I meant to announce that Brad Davidson has laryngitis, and that's why our music program has been altered today. So we're just going to skip over this, and then we're going to substitute for the offertory hymn, an offertory hymn for his special music after the sermon. We all know this passage. It's one of the most popular. The lost sheep, how sweet. But in our Lectio Divina this week, during centering prayer, as we meditated on the passage, And I guarantee you, read it again, you'll always find something new. You'll always find something new. I found something new in this verse. And if he finds it, and if he finds it. First of all, this is a part of 3 parables. The parable of the lost, the parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, and the parable of the lost son, best known as the prodigal son. And unfortunately, that last story has colored the first 2 with an unfortunate interpretation. We all know the story of the prodigal son because we all identify with the prodigal son. The son that got tired of sitting around waiting and goes to his father and he says, "Give me my share of my inheritance right now." And the father grudgingly gives him his share. And he goes off and he spends it on wine, women, and song, or whatever they had back in the first century of the Middle East. And spends all his money and he's broke. And he finds that he has to work in the fields and feed the pigs, and he's feeding the pigs, and he himself is starving. All of that to say, we get this idea of this reprobate sinner who turns around, goes back home, and is welcomed by God. But that has colored our understanding of the lost coin and the lost sheep. We have to ask the question, because each of those have this interpretation laid on them by the gospel writer Luke in particular, that after the shepherd finds the sheep, and after the woman finds the lost coin, and after the father finds the lost son, they rejoice. And he said there's more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over the 99 who never repented. Question: what did the coin have to repent about? Yeah, we just like blithely go along with this repentance theme for the lost coin. And what did the sheep have to repent about? So if you take away the early Christian need to fashion these parables into an evangelical tract, which is what they basically did, if you strip it away and you get back to what Jesus was actually trying to communicate in the very first form of these parables, just set aside this rejoicing in heaven over one sinner. Just throw that out and think about it another way. Maybe this parable should be called the shepherd who lost a sheep. Maybe the parable should be called the woman that lost the coin. And most controversial of all, maybe the third parable should be called the father who lost his son. Maybe the culpability is on the actor. You know, we can do some bad parenting. Amen? We don't get educated about parenting in our formal education. That's been banned because we're supposed to be able to have the freedom to raise our children the way we want to. No vaccine for my kids, whatever. No sex education for my kid. No, we are allowed, we are free to be bad parents. And all first-time parents are amateurs. And so the suggestion is maybe this father made a mistake in giving his son resources that he was not prepared to handle. Maybe the woman lost the coin. The coin didn't jump down off the table. I don't know about you, but I've always had the experience of when I'm counting out my pills and one of those pills drops on the floor and it rolls. And sweep and look and said, how did you get way over in that corner? That doesn't even make any sense. Maybe she lost the coin. So maybe the shepherd lost the sheep. Changes the whole meaning of the story. The shepherd, the woman, the father are God. Ooh, God lost us. God cares for us. The one out of 100 is the one God cares for. Because God knows that that sheep out by itself cannot survive. The 99 together, they can even protect themselves from the wolf. The wolf is always trying to cut one out from the herd. But if they're together, they can defend themselves. But the shepherd knows that that one who's out there is vulnerable and goes to save it because he lost track. So he goes to save it. The woman who had the 10 drachma and she dropped one, she knows that she's got to find that 1 drachma, because if she doesn't find it, it'll never get spent. It will never fulfill its purpose. That's what a coin is for. And the father might actually be the one who repents. Because after he lost his son, all he did every day was run up to the ridge and look to see if his son was going to return. That's why when he finally came, his father was already looking for him. He was rehearsing his confession. He was rehearsing what he was going to say. And he decided, I'm no longer worthy to be your son because I've done this terrible thing. Just make me one of your slaves, and that'll be enough for me. But the father, recognizing that maybe he had lost his son, welcomes him back with open arms. 1 sheep was lost. Most of us would have the impulse to say, yikes, too bad for that sheep. I've got all these to be responsible for. 1 out of 100. An acceptable loss? I'd like for us to focus for a moment on the 1%. No, not that 1%. I mean the other 1%. Part of my message this morning is to ask the question, is Christianity compatible with democracy? The basic thrust of democracy is that the majority rules. That's how it's supposed to work. The majority rules. And if you're in the minority, that's kind of too bad. And you can work and you can try to convince others, and maybe one day you'll be in the majority, and then you'll have your way. But I submit to you that as a Christian, I have a commitment, I have a calling to care about the other 1%. The 1% that will never be a majority. The 1% that are such outliers that they don't have a community. They are just who they are. And they are so different, they will never be part of a majority. They have no faction. They have no friends. They are there by themselves. And it's not their fault. They don't need to repent from being who God created them to be. Maybe we, the 99, maybe we lost track of them. Maybe we lost them. And as a Christian, I have a commitment, a call. This story is told not for us to wait on God to find the sheep. No, it's a call for you. He said, which one of you? He points right to you. If you were a shepherd and you lost a sheep, wouldn't you leave the 99 and go search for that one? The implication being that you don't own the 99. You don't own the 100 sheep. And you can't show up back at the ranch one sheep short, because every sheep counts. Now, I know we often say in the Democratic conversation, every vote counts. Politicians will always tell you that, but they don't really mean it. They only mean their votes count, and they only want to count their votes. But in our faith, it is true. Every sheep counts. And sometimes there is a conflict between our politics and our faith. The greatest example is that we are in our country right now mired in a couple of, we use the word war, but maybe we shouldn't, because if it loses its meaning, I don't know what we're going to call the real thing that's getting ready to happen. So, for the moment, we're in these wars. We're in these culture wars. And we're in these economic wars. What's the best way? Unrestrained free markets or managed markets that have some social dimension to them? That's kind of the economic debate. And then we have the culture war. Should people conform and comply to the majority way of being, heteronormativity and all that kind of stuff? Or should people be free to be whoever they are? So we have these wars. And sometimes the politicians who do count votes will sacrifice the one sheep so that they can get elected. And other politicians who don't care about the outlier, they will gladly exploit the care and concern that some might have for the one lost sheep, the one outside sheep, and bash the politics and say, oh, they don't care about you. They care about they, them. They don't care about you. That was an actual ad. Now, most of us didn't see that ad here in California because our vote doesn't count. It's all blue. But as I mentioned last fall, I was coming from a meeting in Arizona for Compassion and Choices. We met in Phoenix, Arizona, and this was in October. And the TV political ads were nonstop. And I looked at the screen and I could not believe my eyes. The culture bashing, she's for they, them, we're for you. The deliberate alienation on, people just living their lives. And of course, how does it affect me? The Democrats keep talking about, we got to focus on the economy, while the Republicans are focusing on the culture and eating our lunch. I've been saying this for a long time because, you know what? I've actually been a minority most of my life, so I kind of have an insight into it. And a long time ago, I tried to tell people racism is irrational. People will sacrifice their economic well-being to maintain their white supremacy. Some of y'all remember Timothy, our associate pastor, almost 20 years ago now, Timothy Murphy. He learned a lot from us, but I learned a lot from him. He was from Kentucky. And, he and I would talk, and I'd never lived in Kentucky, but I just wouldn't understand. And we were talking, he said, there's a saying, because we were having the same conversation. He said, there's a saying down south, free, white, and 21. I said, what? It means I'm free, I'm not black, I'm white, and I'm 21, which gives me the right to vote, which puts me ahead of every other black person. So, I've been saying a long time, racism is irrational. And we have to get out of this box, and we have to face the reality of the world that we live in. But I just want to finish on this note. I heard a statistic during the campaigns last year. All this talk about trans athletes, and they still are talking this nonsense. A statistic someone cited that in the state of Ohio, there was one varsity female trans athlete. One. But it was distorting our politics across the nation. So I think we as Christians, we have to care about the other 1%. So while there might be one trans athlete, trans folks in America are what? 1% of the population. 1%. We have to care about the 1%. That's our call. And that's not going to fly in our politics, but we have to care about the 1%. There's some other 1%. 1% of felons have a college degree. And so yes, we need to, what they call it, ban the box that requires a felon to check, yes, I've been a felon. Because once you check that box, no matter how qualified you are, no matter how reformed you are, no matter how repentant you are, you cannot get a job. So we've got to care for that person who's just trying to make it back into the world. I think we can all understand that there are many other 1% that we need to care about. And I think that's our call as Christians. And I think that does have a conflict with the politics that would sacrifice, that would leave that 1% up here in the choir loft and go on with the majority. Because in politics, in democracy, the majority rules. So I'm very sensitive to 1%. I've been a 1% here in Carlsbad. But there are many other 1% that we must find and care about. Because with God, every sheep counts. God bless you. Amen.
God is calling us to care for our communities and churches here on this side of heaven. May we name the ways we can create heaven on earth for our neighbors. By using our talents, our treasures, and time, may we seek to build safety and sanctuary for all of God's children. The ushers can come forward.
This is one of our changes. We're going to stand and sing if you're able and willing. Well, actually, stay seated because we're passing the plates. But we'll sing our offertory hymn, Take My Gifts, hymn number 562.
Please join me in the offertory prayer. Dear Father, Mother God, we are thankful for the love, warmth, and acceptance we are blessed to experience in this pilgrim community. Now please give us the grace, understanding, and compassion to share the blessing of that same love, warmth, and acceptance with those beyond these walls. We thank you for the privilege of carrying your message to the world. To those for whom love is a stranger, may we be kind and generous friends. Amen.
Just a reminder that you're invited to the patio for some refreshments to fortify you for our forum that will reconvene here in about 15 minutes. So now receive the benediction. Go out into God's world and search not for the 99, but for the one, the lost, the left behind, the one that's vulnerable to the wolves of this world. Pick them up, put them on your shoulder, and rejoice with the God of our salvation. Amen. for staying. I'm sorry about the arrangement here. I know it looks a little naked up front, but we are hosting on Monday through Friday the Mormon Stake Seminary class. The Mormon Stake across the street had to vacate their property due to a mold condition, and they asked if they could have their high school students attend their seminary class 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. before they go to Carlsbad High School, Monday through Friday. Wow. So I'm glad they didn't think that we were so toxic that they could send their students here. If any of you know about Mormonism, I did shudder at one of my sermon titles that faces their building. The sermon title was, is baptism necessary? And so if you know anything about Mormonism, it would be quite a situation there. But we are so thankful and graced with Narda Zakina, present here in accompaniment with Robert Scheer. Robert Scheer is a renowned journalist and the editor-in-chief and publisher, I guess, of Scheer Post, SCHEERPOST.com.
Of which Narda, by the way, is the editor-in-chief. You keep leaving her out of this, Madison.
I didn't.
Could you stand up, Narda?
Yes,
yeah,
please
No,
do.
come on. Yes. And he didn't give her a proper introduction before, so I'm going to take over. Narda was the associate editor of the Los Angeles Times, the deputy editor of the San Francisco Chronicle. She's a 4 times Pulitzer Prize judge. She's written 4 or 5 really important books, one with the mother of Pat Tillman, who was sacrificed to friendly fire, since we're talking about Veterans Day. Spent years working on that with his mother, trying to get to the truth of the matter. So Narda Zakino is really, and I'm not saying this to be cute about the little lady or something, Narda is really one of the outstanding pioneering journalists in this country, and which there were only 2 women at the LA Times, none of them covering hard news when she went there. And despite the prejudices of the paper, rose to run most of the LA Times. So Narda, why don't you get the, and I would recommend to you, sir, next time you don't have me be the speaker, you have Narda be the speaker, okay?
I will.
And then I can
take you up on
enjoy
that.
myself and even maybe take some refreshments and not be nervous. I also want to say something about my own relationship to the good Reverend here. Some people have guided me in my religious thinking, and 2, particularly in Southern California, Rabbi Leonard Bierman and the good Reverend here. And they're my go-to people. Leonard Bierman, unfortunately, has died. And, but I would go to them, call them anytime. I teach ethics at USC. You didn't even get mentioned. I'm a professor at USC, right? The Annenberg School. I've been there for 30 years. And I teach ethics, among other things, mass media and so forth. But whenever I got into some issue or wanted to deal with, and Madison has been kind enough to speak in my class almost every semester, one of my classes. But these are the 2 people that I would consult with. And, you know, do I have it right? And particularly on matters of Jesus. This was my knowledgeable Jesus project expert. And go through and, you know, educate me, because I'm supposed to really know something about this if I'm teaching ethics. And so I do want to thank you.
No, I'm going to do a little bit more.
Okay, you go ahead.
So Robert, of course, was a longtime journalist, op-ed columnist at the Los Angeles Times. And what...
No, Madison, I was a national correspondent, and then when you got to read me, because you're a much younger man.
Yes.
You know, finally I met someone here. I thought I'm going to be the oldest guy. I used to have this experience with Leisure World down in Orange County. I started out as this young kid, and then, you know, 30 years later, I'm still speaking there, and I realized I'm the oldest person in Leisure World, you know. They don't even call it that anymore, you know. And so finally, I met someone who was my age. What month?
We got a few here that'll beat you,
Oh, you do?
Robert.
Oh, a few
Yes, we
that
do.
beat me?
Yes, we
Okay.
do. Yes.
But I am going to be 90, and so this is pretty significant.
And still a professor of communications and journalism at USC, Annenberg School of Journalism and Communication. I was working backwards, so I was saying LA Times. And for my congregation that has known me as an occasional contributor to the op-ed page, what Robert's too modest to say, it was Robert Scheer that introduced me to the then editor Bob Berger for my first article, and that opened the door to a decade or more of a real.
You know, let me say something about that. You know, look, I did a thing the other night. We went to hear last night, wasn't it, Narda? We went to hear Tom Johnson. He's written a book. He used to be the publisher of the LA Times, and we were, God forbid, but in this hall. But we went to the California Club to hear him. And one of the things that struck me, and I love Tom Johnson, he went on to, after being publisher of the LA Times, he was the head of CNN, really made CNN what it was. And he had previously been with Lyndon Johnson in the White House, a great guy. But we're at the California Club. And I thought, wait a minute, when I was working at the LA Times and I wrote a story about it, you wouldn't let a Jew in the building, right? Hershey Brown was the first one because he was head of Caltech and Secretary of Defense, and the head of Caltech was automatically a member of the California Club, which along with the Jonah Club ran the whole city. And then I thought, well, women, right? Wasn't it Celeste Durant who failed on 2 counts? One, she was a black person and a black woman, and then Neville Younger announced for running for governor. They stopped her at the door for going to the press conference, and the whole press corps had to walk out and have the press conference outside because they wouldn't let Celeste Durant in the front door. And now I was there at the California Club last night. I said, God, they've let some other people in, and the building still stands.
Yes.
Hasn't been an instant destruction of American values, which begin with slavery, of course, and genocide against the Native Americans.
Let me finish my introduction.
I'm ready to go, Ron. You can let me go anytime you want.
Okay, hold on.
Just tell me what the time limit is.
Okay, but Robert is well known for, among those of you who read the articles in Playboy magazine, there were articles, the interview of Jimmy Carter, in which he confessed that he had lust in his heart. And many thought that might be the end of his career, but actually it kind of helped him along. But many other groundbreaking, from Ramparts and his reporting from Vietnam, his reporting from the Middle East, from the West Bank and Gaza and Israel, just the journalist of journalists, the dean of journalists, if you will. And we are so grateful that you are our friend. And we've asked you here in this second week of November to reflect on this past year. It was 1 year ago that we had a national presidential election that re-elected Donald Trump. And we can say that this year has been consequential because he did not waste any time. He did not wait for inauguration and has been busy. And the state of our democracy has been transformed in this past year. And I couldn't think of a better person to ask to give us an assessment on the state of our democracy nationally and here in true blue California. We had a ballot initiative that some suggested might be anti-democratic. We've had some legislation that some would say might be anti-democratic. So now, Robert, I'll give you 15 minutes and then we'll have some conversation and some Q&A. Tell us, what's the state of our democracy?
Okay, first of all, I'm going to disappoint you if you think I'm here just to bash Trump. Okay, that's not my inclination. I'm a journalist. I take it seriously. And if I fail, then I got my wife sitting there who will chew me out, because we do take seriously the demand of our profession, and it is a profession, and I teach it, and so forth. And so I just want to warn you, I'm not here to be a cheerleader or a partisan. And I do want to say something about Veterans Day. I didn't mention about Narda, but it's her brother really who ruined her mother's career in the Marine Corps by getting pregnant. from another Marine officer who was her husband. But the two of them served honorably in World War II, and they were not given to jingoism or super-duper patriotism throughout their life. They were down there in San Diego, working class people, and they were incredibly progressive. And I don't know if we're allowed to talk about it, but they also were Catholic, and they were quite progressive, and challenged the church on even some minor things, like why could she bring beer to the priests but not to the nuns, and stuff like that. So, but anyway, it moved me. We are celebrating veterans, and I thought about my own relation while I was sitting there. Believe it or not, I thought your sermon was great. Yeah, and I really appreciate, because sometimes I would speak here and I'd get here late and not miss the whole deal. And either you've gotten a lot better and the church has gotten a lot more interesting, or I was out to lunch the other times I came too preoccupied with what I was going to say. But I thought this was a really moving, and I told Narda, yeah, if we lived anywhere near here, we don't drive much anymore, you know. So I'm not putting down the train, but, you know, it's a bit much to go every week. But I would actually join. And I hope that doesn't mean stop being Jewish. Well, I'll get into that in a little. Do I only have 15 minutes?
No, I know that if I say 15, it'll be 30.
yeah.
But let me say this. You would not be our first Jewish member.
Okay.
And two, we have a very special membership. It's called the once a month membership. And so all you have to do is come down once a
I
month.
already gave my $20. Unfortunately, I got Marriott points, so I was able to stay at that nice hotel near here, thanks to the Mormons. They run a good place.
Yes, and you can Zoom the other
But I'm going to
weeks.
get to a lot here. I really actually prepared some stuff for today, so maybe I should just run my mouth a little bit. But I do want to say something about War and Peace. You know, I actually remained 1A until I was, I think, 30, whatever the legal rate, 36 or 35. And when I went to the draft board in the Bronx, grew up in the Bronx, and went there when I was 18. Yeah, somebody from the Bronx? Wow. See, everybody celebrates Brooklyn, but you know, Brooklyn is just gentrified, you know, Palm Beach or something, you know. But anyway, the Bronx was a great place. But I went to Arthur Avenue Draft Board, and then they gave me a form, you know, have you ever read these magazines or done that? I said, I read all of them. They're great, you know, the Communist Daily Worker and the PM and you know, I came from a family of radical working class people. They were Wobblies and everything else. And so they decided I was a psychiatric problem, had to go talk to some shrink. And then he said, well, what, are you a conscientious objector? First he said, are you a traitor? And I said, no, I believe very much in the American Constitution, limits of power and all these things. And then, you know, by then I was a smart-ass college student at City College, you know, I could quote chapter and verse. And they said, well, what do you think about war? I said, well, in those days, now I would probably have said I was a pacifist, but I wasn't. I said there are just wars and so forth, but if you declare an unjust war, I can't use your gun, but I'll be glad to know how to learn how to use it in case I want to be on the other side or something. I was a smart ass, you know, and as a result, I went on this journey for years, being a 1A, but having to go every year practically to the Presidio or wherever I was living to be talked to again and checked once again. And so it was really quite bizarre, and then I'd get in these stupid philosophical arguments at 2 in the morning at the Presidio, wondering if they're ever going to let me out of here. But I did feel the need to explore war. And so in 1963, 64 was the first time. I thought, well, I wasn't trying to avoid going to Vietnam, I'll go. And I got Paul Krasner of the Realist magazine. He had just done a terrific thing. I don't know if you ever remember Krasner and the Realist. I mean, he was one of these great malcontents. And he had made these can you say fuck in the, yeah? Okay. He had come up with a red, white, and blue poster that said, fuck communism. And it was great because kids would buy it and then hang it up in the dorm. And in those days, this was still pretty repressive. you know, and the dorm person or somebody would say, you have to take it down, or the parent would have to say it down, and then the kid could say, what, you believe in communism? Are you a communist? You know, why can't you say fuck communism, you know? So it made a fortune. I mean, people were just gobbling these things up. So I said to Paul Krasny, you know, I started thinking, I'd gone down to Cuba first as a graduate student at Berkeley, and the Cuban Revolution had happened. I wanted to see that one for myself. Came back and wrote a book with another guy, Maurice Zeitlin, who went on to be a professor, first at Princeton and then at UCLA for many, a great professor, sociologist. And so I was into the issue, and then this Vietnam War was starting. And so I said to Krasny, I'm really writing about this, I'm looking into this, but I got to go. And he said, well, what can I do for you? I said, you can give me $1,355.76. I'll go right now and get myself a round-trip ticket. That's in the old days. And he sent me there. And so, you know, it wasn't a couple of weeks later, I found myself in the Mekong Delta, frightened out of my mind in one of those Graham Greene moments. I don't know if you read much Graham Greene, but not just a quiet American. And literally found myself in one of the huts left over from the French involvement overnight, frightened out of my mind because there was gunfire. And I was in there with a couple of Vietnamese people from the area, and they didn't know whether I was going to kill them, or I didn't know whether they were going to kill me, but we got through a lovely night together and bonded, and so that was my introduction to war and its reality. And so I went around the world as a journalist and did a lot of stuff, and one that I will talk about today, if I don't run out of time, was I happened, when I was the editor of Ramparts, I got invited by someone who was head of Harvard SDS, and his father had worked for the Arab League and was actually married to a Jewish woman, but he called me up. He said, my father says he can get you into Egypt. This was at the tail end of the Six-Day War, very germane to things I want to talk about today. And so I went over with his father, and we landed in Cairo at the airport. It was not easy to do. And we got there right at the, you know, pretty close to the end of the war, after the war. And first thing that was made clear to me, and I always identified, I'll get into my own background, but I always identify myself as something that they might be apprehensive about, so nobody could accuse me of lying. You know, if somebody, like when I traveled with Jerry Falwell, by the way, this is not the first Protestant minister I've dealt with. When he was doing the moral majority, I traveled with, when I was working at the LA Times, and then he complained much later when I wrote about him. He said, God, I treated him as a son and he betrayed me. But, you know, I said, well, you betrayed Jesus, and he was another. But you know, but seriously, I tried to be open, I tried to be fair, and I thought I was. And whoever I interviewed Nixon later in life, I interviewed Reagan. I've done a lot of this stuff. I always try to be very honest. Whoever I interviewed, I try to let them know where I'm coming from. I try to be objective, but I can't pretend. You know, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, the great beat poet, who also had a doctorate from the Sorbonne, used to say, keep an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out. And I would tell people, look, I have, you know, I'm born, I've had experience. I was born, as you were, in 1936, was the low point of the Depression. My father lost his job the day I was born, didn't get it back, a real job, went to the Works Project Administration and everything. So I know something, you know, I had some attitudes about poverty, you know, about life. My parents were both garment workers in New York. My mother was the other woman. My father had a family. He was a good man, though, and he stayed with his family until the kids graduated. My half-brother went into the military and ended up bombing our home area, Germany. My father was a Lutheran by birth. I'd come here after the First World War, and my mother was Jewish from Lithuania. And so I had a real life experience, and I know something about, you know, growing up in a pretty rough environment. And so I can't deny it affects my perspective on life. And in fact, it's interesting. I promised you asked me to talk about the politics and where we are now. To my mind, the most significant event that has happened in recent American history is the election of this new mayor of New York City. And let me explain why. But I dropped my thread about going to watch wars. So I just want to say, the startling, and this connects with this election in New York City, because I was there, and I landed in Egypt, and I was traveling with this fellow, and somehow the Egyptian army was so screwed up. You know, this was a preemptive war that Israel fought. I don't know if you know this history. They were not under any attack, certainly not by Palestinians. There was no Palestinian army or aircraft or anything. The Palestinians were an occupied people at that time. Gaza was occupied by Egypt. West Bank was occupied by Jordan. The Golan Heights were occupied by Syria. So when I arrived in Egypt, the word had gone that we were very special, because the guy I was traveling with, Mr. Ansara, he was in the Arab League. He had no Nasser, the nationalist leader of Egypt, and so forth. However, because the Egyptian army was so screwed up, the message got translated to watch these guys, they're foreign spies. So we arrived rather late, and we were held under gunpoint for about 6 hours. So it gave me a rather jaundiced expectation of my visit now, and I was really pissed off with my colleague. Yeah, you got connections, I bet. Lucky we get out of here. And then finally, some limo showed up and said, this is a big mistake, and they started yelling at our protectors or captors. And the next thing I knew, we were in this limo going down to downtown and going to be treated, meet the big, you know, the hero himself and everything. And so I spent some time there, and about a month and a half. And then when I got out, I wrote some things for Ramparts, put us into bankruptcy. I'm very good at that, either getting fired or putting people into bankruptcy. And in fact, it was an interesting moment the other night. Tom Johnson, once again, he said this before, he told Narda here, he said, you know, I expected you to be the editor-in-chief of the paper. He said this before he went off to CNN. And I had told him the story once before, so I corrected him the other night. I said, yeah, but she married the wrong guy. And that was the reality. I was the controversial lefty at the paper, and they weren't going to make her, they made her the associate editor, but not the editor-in-chief. But anyway, then when I was there, I said, oh, well, now I've got to go to Israel. And I went over to Cyprus, and got my things stamped differently and everything else, and went over there. And I must say that first night, this has a lot to do with objectivity, where we come from, what we bring to any coverage. I landed in Tel Aviv. I'd been in Egypt. And as I said, I always identified myself. I never lied. And I didn't say I'm half Jewish. I said I'm Jewish. And actually in Egypt, I talked to some very well-known Jewish writers, people like that. Got a different perspective also. But I must say, my first night in Tel Aviv, I was drunk on the place. It was like New York with only Jews. You know, and you know, when I was growing up, being Jewish was contentious. I lived in a Jewish neighborhood, but my wife's Italian Catholic folk were not always kind to us, and the Irish were a lot worse. And I was punched in the nose a few times and told, "You killed our Lord," you know. And the first time I think it was about 6, so I couldn't even figure it out. And then it was explained to me, they think we killed Jesus, you see. I said, so the next time somebody threatened me with that, I said, oh no, only half of me did it. But that didn't work out so well, you know, and then I stopped trying to apologize for it and trying to understand people. Meanwhile, half my family there, and so I had to deal with those Italians and Irish and the public school system and everything else. But also, when my father and mother got united, after his kids grew up, they didn't get married, but they got united and so forth, and I loved them all, and I loved my father's ex-wife. I have one of these kind of families that we're supposed to be ashamed of if we're proper born-again Christians, but I found it a very nurturing, wonderful family, and I still get email from my half-brother and sister's offspring, and I can tell a very positive story, but it was culturally very interesting and relates to a lot of this election and what we're talking about, because I had half of my family in New York were Lutherans, and some were even Catholics, you know, and I was born in 36, you know, so aside from dealing with the Depression and class, which we never talk about in America, but I was very familiar with it, and most of the bosses that my parents worked for in New York were Jewish. And they didn't like them, my parents. My father led a wild-eyed strike, whether they were Jewish or Catholic or Protestant. If they were the big bosses, they were not on our side, you know. And they loved Roosevelt. They didn't care what he was because he did the right thing, you know. So a lot of our politics, my education, had really a denial of the authority that we're supposed to respect now, you know. It really didn't matter your skin color, your religious preference, you know, your gender, you know, or anything else. What mattered is where did you stand on this class struggle, which was not a minor issue, you know, not a minor issue. My mother worked as a garment worker until she retired at 65, because she was afraid she would lose her Social Security. And when she came to live with me in Berkeley, and then live with my wife and I until she was about 88 or so, she didn't want to lose her Social Security retirement, which ended up being $65 a month. She would have been a bag lady if I couldn't help her out, okay? And her union pension wasn't much better. Maybe the whole thing came to $130 or something. And this was the 60s, so it's not ancient. So, you know, I never lost the thread in that class matters. Economic oppression matters. That doesn't deny other forms of oppression. I'm not going to deny that. I don't want to have a silly argument. But the thing that has been systemically left out of our culture, out of education, the denial of the American dream, the fantasy, is that class doesn't matter. We have opportunity, anybody can do it, and it's a lot of crap. It's just a lot of crap. What Donald Trump faced growing up in Queens, his German relatives were not my German relatives, and were not my Jewish relatives. You know, my brother worked as a tool and die maker, you know. My uncle Edward, also German Protestant, worked as a welder on gasoline trucks, you know. I knew their reality, and it wasn't any different than my Jewish relatives' realities. You know, my father was a son of German Lutherans and so forth, but he worked at the New York knitting mills. And he was a very popular labor organizer in his own knitting mill, the biggest plant there. And I once was talking at Leisure World, and somebody who knew of my father back then told me he had tried to hire my father, who was a very skilled machinist on these big knitting mills that were made in Germany. He could note the machines. He said, I tried to hire your father for 20 years. He wouldn't go because he didn't want to cross the line and become management. He was committed to union organizing. And so he worked for a 10% or 20% of what he would have been making because he didn't want to cross over and betray his fellow workers, you know? And that was not unknown in the German community, the Polish community, the Irish community, or anything else, you know? And by the way, in this election in New York, to bring it back, this is not the first time we had somebody who's been called a radical. When I was growing up in New York City, you can look it up, we had 2 communists on the city council. One of them was a guy named Peter Caccione. I can't remember the other guy's name. There were at least 3 members of the American Labor Party. And then there were the Liberal Party, and even the New York Post, which gave this guy such a hard time, back in those days was considered a leftist publication. You know, the New York Times we considered a bourgeois rag, but there are plenty of mass journalism. So let me bring it to your election thing before you think I've gone completely off the rails. I think that there's a number of themes that come together in this particular race. And that is, for the first time, class politics are front and center. And this is something that was denied most prominently by the people called the New Democrats. You know, the Bill Clinton type, okay? And again, keeping an open mind and so forth, no president has treated me better than Bill Clinton, okay? In particular, in a very egotistical way, let me tell you, one of the things that my marriage, I was always the lesser to this one here. I've had 3 marriages, so let me confess. I really believe in the institution. It's been glorious throughout. I got married in an Orthodox Jewish wedding the first time around. I've been very close to my first wife. My second wife was a proper WASP, Episcopalian, and so forth. And then my third one is this Catholic one here. They've all been wonderful. They're all great friends and get along. But the fact of the matter is, in that journey, you know, this question of class kept being pushed away. And one could argue, first was seriously challenged by Ronald Reagan. And, you know, until then we had the mythology, right, of the ever-expanding middle class. We had the hangover of the New Deal. We had strong labor unions. Most of the things that, in fact, all of the things that were at stake in that New York election were already guaranteed to us when I was growing up in New York. All of them. We had rent control. It was the norm. Otherwise, we couldn't have lived in New York City. You know, they wouldn't have had our labor. I remember as a kid, we didn't have a refrigerator for 2 years because we were a test case whether the landlord had to pay for the new refrigerator or they could add $2 to the rent. And so for 2 years, I had to go downstairs to one of the neighbors and say, could I have our milk? And go up and eat breakfast and bring the milk bottle back downstairs so it would stay cold, okay? And rent control was a very live and real issue. We had health care issues, which the unions played a much more aggressive role, much better if you were a Teamster, or one of them reactionary unions, you got real benefits. But a lot of your benefits came from the unions, particularly if you were an auto worker, steel worker. There was no question about that. And you can go down the list. After-school programs that they're fighting about now, we had them galore. Otherwise, how could I have lived? My parents were both working, and they provided after school, you know, when I was growing up in the Bronx. Transportation, never a question. One of the things he wants is free transportation. My God, it wasn't exactly free, but you could put a penny on a trolley track or something, make a slug out of it, and get on the subway. I would go on when I was 9 years old. Go down to Manhattan, live it up, you know, get some pizza, you know, and so forth. So these are not advanced socialist, communist ideas that are being fought for. They're the idea that the government's supposed to serve the people. And I grew up at a time, I don't know if you remember it the same way, where FDR, when FDR died, I was in the Bronx and I was, I guess, 12 years old or something, and people were crying in the streets. I've never seen anything like that in this country. Just poured into the streets crying because FDR was died, okay? And FDR, from a rich background, Protestant, you know, nonetheless, out of necessity, reality, or whatever, had reached out to ordinary people. The Bill of Rights, you know, not the Bill of Rights, the GI Bill of Rights certainly didn't hurt. You know, people could go to college, they could, you know, and yes, if they're white, it helped a lot more than black. We'll get into that. Oh, by the way, Madison, can I just tell you one thing? Okay. It's just in stream of consciousness style that I'm adopting here. I had an argument, I had a discussion with Ken Carlson the other day. Do you remember Ken Carlson?
I remember Ken, yes.
Yes. You know, as I say, I've had Madison in my class a lot of times. I've also had Ken Carlson. He spoke in my class. Ken Carlson's a white guy from Ohio, former football player, and then went to Brown and so forth. This guy did go to Harvard at one point, so they both had the snobbish appeal. You know, but nonetheless, I showed a movie in my class on Southern Sudan, right? And Ken Carlson had risked his life to go make this movie. I'm not going to pick a whole fight with you here. And he was making it on a Tom, what's his name? Katina, you remember? He was a guy who played football with him at Brown and then became a serious Catholic and went to, as a doctor, went to run this Catholic hospital, and he made a movie about it. And he risked his life going into Sudan. Ken Carlson did 3 times to make a film about Tom Katina, Dr. Tom, and his heroism. And a rift developed in our class, right? Yes. Which we're not going to revisit, where Madison, some students, and then Madison picked up on it, complained that this was white man's burden.
Well, white savior mythology. Yes.
Okay, white savior mythology. Well, the other night, I came to realize that I disagreed with you.
Okay.
I mean, and we spent, remember?
Yeah.
Madison was staying at my house that night.
Yeah.
And, you know, I struggled with him for a few hours about this, right?
I remember.
Yeah, we stayed up, I think, until maybe the early morning. But the other night, I just pronounced it. I said, Madison Shockley was wrong. I said, I actually think there is a white man's burden. I think as a white man, I should be more responsible. As a white man, I have a lot to atone for. I have a lot to criticize. As a male, as a man, you know, as privileged, because despite my early stories of poverty and so forth, a hell of a lot was done for me, a hell of a lot. And by the way, even in not just race and everything else, I was very moved by the reference to gay people previously. And my friend Melvin Cooper-Smith, you know, everybody forgets the way gay people were treated in America until very modern history. When Willie Brown pushed the thing about gay rights, that was the late 60s in California. It was a felony, serious one. And Melvin Cooper-Smith, one of my 4 closest as a young man, committed suicide out of the 4th floor of a tenement that we were living in, you know, because he found life unbearable as a gay person and the suffering he went through. And then I covered the AIDS issue. So yes, there's a lot of burden. I'm straight also, okay? So that's a burden and a responsibility, let's put it that way. And I really admire Ken, and he goes on to make other movies. So just sharing that with you, you know, and not that you had a valid point, but I do, you know, I just thought about it, and kind of you still can learn when you're 89, you know. And I thought about it and discussed it with my class. And as I say, I also teach an ethics class. We talked about that a little bit and how students felt. But, and there was another issue came up here before about the treatment of people without papers and ICE and so forth, you know. Now my mother, Menarda can tell you, when she was in her 80s, we had INS then coming after her. Because at Riverside, not Riverside, UC Irvine Hospital, County Hospital, some social worker or somebody had turned in my mother, who had questionable papers, you know, and you know, my mother couldn't find half the papers she's supposed to find, but yes, she had. She was challenged and had lived in fear, and also, you know, the question of she had she wasn't married, she couldn't claim that. And so I was thinking about, now through intermarriage and living in LA and, you know, and our experience there, I've covered the issue. I was on the border a lot. I've covered the issue. And as was correctly pointed out here, what's happening with ICE is, you know, one of the great tragedies of American history. There's no way I'll describe it. I mean, these people who have done so much to grow the crops and help raise children and, you know, do your plumbing and electricity, and you couldn't have California without them and its level of prosperity and everything else, are suddenly made hounded criminals and afraid to go to work, and how you're going to feed your family and how you're going to do anything. And to talk about anything but right now is almost, you know, what is that? It means you're heartless, you know. And if anybody has any doubt, I've checked this one a lot. It's only in Luke, but the good reverend here tells me it's valid as the parable of the Good Samaritan. And that relates back to Israel, which I'm circling back to, believe it or not. And the parable of the Good Samaritan, and I do see Jesus as a corrective, and the Christian church, when it's a good church, as a corrective to the failings of the Old Testament. I'm not a great scholar on these things, but it strikes me is that the tribalism implicit in a lot of the Old Testament gets challenged by the teaching of Jesus, including the missionary spirit, that everyone has a soul and they can be brought into a connection with an Almighty. And that's why conversion is pressed so much. In fact, one of the guys when I went to work at Ramparts, it was still a Roman Catholic literary publication. I was the first Jew they let in the door. And remember then Warren Hinkle, and I just picked up one of his old books our great editor and founder. He was a product of Catholic education, and he wrote this great book on the pagan babies. And in the old days, I guess at least the Catholic Church, did this happen in the Protestant church too? They would raise money at church to save the souls of pagan babies. They didn't save the babies themselves. It's like welfare reform. They cared a lot about, the right to have children, and I must say, I have to be kinder about the Catholic bishops. At least they were against welfare reform. In fact, that's how we met. Remember that time? I wrote a column about that. But, the pagan babies, we want to get their souls, so we got to do something to get them converted. What happens to them after? We can make war, like in Vietnam, and Cardinal Spellman could do that. But at least there was a sense that every soul mattered. And then I used the parable of the Good Samaritan because the message is really so clear today. Jesus was saving the other. You've done that here, right? So I don't have to do any biblical education. But the fact of the matter is, that the man's been robbed and beaten and maybe alive or dead. I point out to my students, how often do you even go to check out this hump of humanity lying there on a street corner half a block from USC? Think about it. We have two things that happen to USC. And my wife was the editor of the Bruin at UCLA. I don't want to feed any prejudice she has on this issue. But they do have an awful football team this year. My goodness, lost by another 30 points yesterday. But anyway, the fact of the matter is, we have two things that come across to our students all the time. We have a daily crime report, and then we have this homeless problem. Living downtown, it's there. It's the whole downtown, right? And, think about the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's that what is happening? Somebody's there, disheveled, beaten, and so forth, and two people go by that person, and they walk around him, ignore him.
They cross the street.
Yeah. And one is a member of the prominent Jewish family, right? And one is a rabbi. And then this other person comes along, and this other person is not of that tribe. He's of a rival tribe, right, the Samaritan. And that other person sees this person, this could be a homeless person right next to USC now, and investigates, sees they're still alive, puts him on their donkey, takes him to an inn, says to the innkeeper, you take care of this person, I'm going to be traveling. He was a merchant like Muhammad was, right, the original Muhammad, circulating among all these communities. That's why Juan Cole, in his great book on Muhammad, says Muhammad had a sense of tolerance, openness, because he had been a trader, not trader, but trader, selling things, had to know different languages and so forth. So this person says to the innkeeper, if you take care of this person, here's some money. When I come back, I'll give you more. And then this lawyer, wise-ass lawyer in the crowd, asked Jesus, well, what is that? I'm asking you, how do you get eternal life? Why are you giving me this parable? And then Jesus answered with the parable. He used to know about the Jesus Project. And so that's the person who gets to heaven, not being in the right tribe, not doing well just by your tribe, but doing well by the other. That was Jesus' answer. How Jerry Falwell forgot that, I don't know. But seriously, these messages in any religion, and I'm not here to put down the Hebraic tradition, there's a lot that's great in it. What I am saying is they can all be twisted. They can all represent inconvenient truths. That's the reality of it, So I want to say something. Have I gone on too long already? 5 minutes more? Okay, because I had a lot of notes here. But okay, let me just say, I wanted to pay special tribute to John Lewis. And what I'm trying to do here is what he called good trouble. And John Lewis, the great civil rights leader, died not that long ago. He was actually spoke at Leo Beck and Rabbi Bierman's synagogue and everything. The last time I heard him speak, which was not that long before he died. And he's a great civil rights leader. I knew him with Julian Bond. I did a lot of work on civil rights, writing about it. I participated and so forth. But this whole notion of good trouble. And it seems to me the main thing now is where the main message that's going out everywhere is to avoid controversy, okay, and to avoid raising troubling issues. And this may seem like a very difficult, disjointed journey to the significance of this election, but I'm now going to zero in on it, you know. And the good trouble is to raise issues that have to be raised and not ignore them. As I see the journey of Trump and see this last year, I think Trump is a creation of our failure as a society. I don't blame Trump. I don't think it's just because he's particularly good demagogue or he's particularly manipulative or so forth. We set the field up, okay? And we set it up on a number of issues. The most important, I think, is this question of class that I raised before. What happened was, and this is how we met. It was how we met. My dean, good guy, Jeff Cowan, I respect him a lot, had been in the Clinton administration. He had been head of Voice of America. His father had been. Before that, he's a lawyer, he'd been teacher, and so forth. And I was very critical of Clinton's welfare reform. Now, I had interviewed Clinton before when he was still governor, but he was starting to run for president. And it's one of the things I did at the LA Times. I interviewed a lot of these people. And by the way, on the Jimmy Carter was before I was at the LA Times for Playboy, but that itself was interesting because the thing that caused all the trouble in that interview was he was basically trying to, there's a statement, never hustle a hustler, okay? So what I am there is to interview him for Playboy magazine. It's a pretty difficult assignment, get somebody to talk to Playboy who was running for president. But I was able to do that because while I might be hustling him for the interview, his staff decided he's got a reputation for being too uptight. People want to know, after all, he's the first one wearing religion on his sleeve in a long time. Is this an Elmer Gantry? What is this all about? So he's got to show he's human, right? And we do this long interview. I spent more time with him than anybody had. And at the end of the thing, we let them know, this is the hustle part, that he's still coming across as a little uptight, Sunday school teacher and everything. So this is when he said, look, I'm just like anybody else. And, and it was actually a biblically appropriate statement. He said, I've lusted in my heart, but then I struggle with it, right? Blah, blah. His wife dutifully said, yes, I understand that. But that became the headline. What I thought was going to be the headline in that interview was I was bugging him about, are you going to be like your Democratic predecessor, Lyndon Johnson, and getting us into these mad wars in which, 5-6 million people got killed in Indochina, in which more bombs were dropped on Indochina than were dropped in World War II, including those 59,000 Americans that were killed. So I was bugging him about a lot of serious stuff. And he said in that interview, bless him, he said, no. I said, why shouldn't we worry? Because you're a little bit hawkish. Why won't you get us in? Democrats have gotten us into a lot of wars. He said, because I would never lie to the American people the way Lyndon Johnson did. Now, that might have been okay when you're running in the primary and you're still trying to get younger votes. But now he's won the Democratic nomination. And the interview comes out after. And we're on an airplane. I was on Air Force, wasn't Air Force One. I was on the candidate's plane. Press corps had already landed earlier, but I got in this good seat. And we land, and Sam Donaldson races over and calls me, oh, Bob, we got to talk to you, I got the setup here. And the first thing that made the news from that interview was his saying that Lyndon Johnson had lied. Lady Bird Johnson was waiting at the airport. It was interesting because last night, our former publisher, he had been in that White House. And he worked for Lady Bird running the radio station. She left the airport. And so the first question was about lying, and it was a very strong statement. And I was saying what he said. And yes, he did say it. And then suddenly this thing came into Sam Donaldson's ear. No, ask about the lust in the heart. So lust in the heart suddenly became an international news story, unbelievable, right? Forgotten was Vietnam, war, death, millions of people, destruction, that's gone. Lust took over, which was a perfectly reasonable statement from a Sunday school teacher. So at any rate, there was that. The thing with Clinton, and I'll end with this and can open up, because this is where the trouble starts with Trump, okay, is that Clinton redefined the Democratic Party from its roots, basically, in the Depression, not the old Democratic Party, which was racist and Dixiecrat. Everybody forgets that until 1964, when the Mississippi delegation rebelled. But no, now we did have the New Deal, Roosevelt. And by the way, the American military during World War II, was segregated, right? And you know that Roosevelt was carried up up the ship because we were lied to about his having polio, but we also didn't, why is it a black man carrying him? Because black men were stewards in the Navy, not trusted to do other things. Interestingly enough, in terms of my own autobiography, it shocked me as a child. How could my German relatives, and this goes to Trump, let me bring it back. Trump has never has expressed any remorse about our common German relatives creating the Holocaust. Somehow the Holocaust got blamed on the Palestinians. Think about that. I mean, if you think of an insult to the people who died in the Holocaust, whether they're Jewish or gypsies or homosexuals or what have you, but the idea that somehow Palestinians who had no army, no navy, no death camps, nothing, and were captured from one group of occupiers to another, right, in a war that they had nothing to do with, nothing, somehow they are associated with what? Anti-Semitism, with these problems, with the Holocaust and the memory of Holocaust. And here you have a president, I'm only half German, and I'm not saying every German is responsible, but it came out of a German culture. It came out of the acquiescence of the German Protestant and Catholic Church, for sure, and that somehow these Palestinians are held responsible for what? Anti-Semitism in the world? Not the California Club, that wouldn't let Jews in, right? No. And so when you look at that strange history, of rewriting history, what it was, it's bizarre, and it gets to me. So I want to just deal with the basic question about the elections. That what happened was that Trump hit upon this soft spot that the Democrats had created. Beginning with Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, who I also spent a lot of time interviewing, and I liked, aside from, I can have differences and still get along with people. But Ronald Reagan was not able to pull off his fantasy about, freeing the market. He wasn't able to do it. And ironically, and I interviewed Ronald Reagan before he was governor. I interviewed him before he was president. I got more time with him, and I never had a moment where he let his press people interrupt us. He was always very good, and I actually talked to him after he had been president. And also, another one, I could lose what remains of our audience. I got along with Nixon 10 years after he was president. So I kind of pride myself on when I put on my listening ears when I do an interview and actually get myself psyched up before to think, this guy might be right and I might be all wrong, okay? It's not easy to do, but I do it, okay? And so with Reagan, the fact of the matter is he was always conflicted. Everybody is always conflicted, even the bad people, or even when they do bad stuff. Reagan's father had been a New Deal person in the executive, So he always said, I didn't leave the Democratic Party left me. He said, I believed in the New Deal. I believed in Roosevelt. He said the only fair reason, he says this in the book, by the way, he wrote, The Rest of Me, if you want to check it out. It was a very good early book of his. And he said, we only had food on the table because of the New Deal. I know what it's like to grow up. But the Democratic Party went off base. They went off to other things. What happened was Reagan went on, he was, the B actor. He went on this lucrative deal with GE. And GE happened to be one of the most progressive employers, not because of their good intention, but the United Electrical Workers, which was a leftist union then, not to the IUE, which came after red baiting, was one of the more progressive unions, just as the auto workers, Ford Local 600, right, the UAW, and so forth. So Reagan was visiting all these all GE plants. This is before GE Capital and they became a basic banking thing. They were making good light bulbs, good products and everything. And he went to these plants and he found happy workers. They were happy like the General Motors workers. They were making good wages. They could have a little boat. They could have their own house. Unions were great. They were allies of big industry that was successful. So Reagan, who always bragged about being the head of a labor union, the Screen Actors Guild, he said, I'm not anti-labor. He bought the fantasy that monopoly capitalism would do well by these people, all right? Well, what was happening were the unions were being destroyed. And the regulation from the New Deal was being destroyed. But Reagan, who tried to do a bit of that, got derailed because he had the savings and loan scandal. And because of the savings and loan scandal, suddenly banking lost its whatever respect it had managed to buy. And I know this, I interviewed him about it and so forth, he got angry. He said, what's going on here? And he actually pulled back a bit at the end, just as he did on foreign policy with Gorbachev and welcomed peace, which the people came after didn't. And so Reagan really did not accomplish much in the way of the Reagan Revolution economically, nor did he really do much foreign policy. He had his, terrible adventures, but he was not the big Cold Warrior. Clinton comes in, and as I say, Clinton was very nice to me. I got to, my wife here, she can tell you, got to go to a White House dinner, and my wife was all proud we were there. And this was the first time in our life when I was I was the second, because she was the associate editor of the LA Times, right? And so I'm there as the spouse. And in fact, in one corporate meeting, not far from this place, I forget where it was, I had to be with the other wives going on a South Coast Plaza shopping tour while my wife is in there with all males, for 2 days on big business meetings. But let me just...
So Clinton.
Yeah, I'm going to get back to Clinton. But at this dinner, just to show you, we're all courted. We're all supposed to be courtiers in the court, all journalists, and we're all courted. So this was my moment to be courted. So my wife comes up to me and they give you a little card and they don't tell you where you're sitting. And then you're told when you go through the receiving line, this is the last White House dinner of the Clinton administration. Don't say a word, they're very busy and we're very late. Okay, so she says, looks at the card and she says, let me see where I'm sitting. And she says, oh, I'm sitting with the head of NBC Sports. This is going to be great because the Olympics are coming up. And she said, let's see where you're sitting. She comes back and says, what, you're sitting with Clinton? That's the #1 table. You're supposed to give like $500,000 to get at that seat. And I'm there with him. Okay, and then we go through the receiving line. I'm told not to say anything. Bill Clinton jumps back and says, you didn't answer my last letters, Mama. What's the matter with you, Bob? And everything, and because he liked something I'd written. And then Hillary Clinton says, and I think she's played an awful role running against Bernie Sanders, but leaving that aside. She says, oh, Bob Scheer, my favorite columnist in America, no, the whole world. I say, oh, shit, I must have really sold out here, and I get to have this very nice dinner. However, writing about it, which is how I first met you, I was shocked, about the welfare reform. Shocked. Because when I interviewed him before he was president, he started that crap about end welfare as we know it. I said, and I grew up on welfare. It's called home relief back then. I said, what are you talking about? Who's going to raise the children? What kind of jobs are people going to get? And I made him committed to 2 things by that questioning. It can't be a budget balancer. If you really want to get people out of poverty, you got to give them education. You got to give them child care. You got to take care of the children. This cannot be something to save money. Secondly, it has to be an enlightened federal program. You can't leave it up to the tender mercies of the state. because the states are going to play a meanness derby, drive them up to Oregon, or drive them to another state, screw the poor, get rid of them, and so forth, okay? Clinton said that in my LA Times interview. Yes, on both counts. It has to cost you more money, you have to give more families, well, he betrayed all of that. Betrayed all of that right away. And he went on, the real big betrayal, and this is, I'm sorry, long-winded way of explaining Donald Trump. He unleashed Wall Street. He did the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, the credit default swaps, all of that, and he basically deregulated Wall Street. Then he deregulated the emerging internet. That's how you can have companies like Google and so forth buying up everybody, because we forgot about antitrust. They can buy up their competition. So it was the worst presidency we've had in modern history. You heard it from me, okay? Sorry. It was sold in our name. It was sold as enlightened and progressive, and it opened the floodgates of misery. As a result, you impoverished what was supposed to be the heart of that emerging middle class in America, which were white people, particularly white males. That's the army for Trump. That's the long and the short of it. And Bernie Sanders was an effective opponent, right? Because he dared to talk about the failures of the economy for most Americans, no matter their skin color, their race, or their gender, or anything else, okay? And so Trump is an aberration in the American system only if we think the American system was working just wonderfully, and then this demagogue came along and lied to people. He's not an aberration if you think that American capitalism, as envisioned by people who believed in an enlightened capitalism, which ranged from Adam Smith to even Nelson Rockefeller, who I did interview, and David Rockefeller. But the people who believed that American capitalism succeeds best when it's greedy, corrupt, and supported by government in this weird marriage with government power and Wall Street, which is what the whole military-industrial complex, but not only that, the deregulation. Let them make their phony, Commodity Futures Modernization Act. Let them make all that phony. That creates the basis for Trump.
Yeah.
That creates it. Now, if it had been Bernie Sanders against Trump, instead of Hillary, okay, one last thing. In their debate, Hillary Clinton and Trump, Hillary Clinton said, and this to me was the most revealing moment of our modern politics. Oh, my watch just told me I had a heart attack. It looks like you've taken a hard fall. Emergency call. I'm okay, I have to tell them. Okay, this is because I've had 2 open heart surgeries and 3 cancers. It gives me warnings about every 2 hours. But okay, the
Hillary
key,
Clinton said.
Huh?
You were saying Hillary Clinton said.
Yeah, Hillary Clinton said to Trump, you say you're going to make America great again. I want you to remember this. You say you're going to make America great again. America has always been great. That sentence carries the essential deception about our society, who we are as a people, and the religious message that you may get in this church, but you're not getting from the mega churches. America was not always great. America was always a work in progress, at best. Sometimes it was not making progress. It was not great when it committed Jewish genocide against the Native American population, well documented. You know, it was not great when it tried to smash unions for 100 years, shot up workers trying to organize. It was not great when we had a segregated, we're talking about the bad part of our victories. Why was the American military, in its greatest fight for freedom in the world, a segregated armed forces?
Don't skip over trafficking Africans for 250 years.
Yeah, but you think, and then you think about after the end of slavery, the continuation of a segregated South. So we've inherited all of that. Fortunately now, okay, my last line, Leonard Cohen, there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. Crack in everything. Contradictions save us. We are living in a time now of enormous contradiction. All right? Enormous. We are still far and away the wealthiest society that has ever existed, and we're denying food stamps, so you have to have an appeal in this church to get food to people. How can that be? America's always been great. Why do we have this poverty? Why is it dependent upon these handouts in this way? Well, no, it hasn't always been great. You know, in some ways, yes, we have, final thing. We talk about the Constitution. I just want to remind people here. Sorry, I wrote it down. Do you remember what the First Amendment says here, anybody?
Yeah, freedom of assembly,
No, not freedom of assembly.
speech,
No, not freedom of speech.
religion.
Congress shall make, this is the beginning, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's the first thing in the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now, not only did Donald Trump and his Republican cronies in Congress ban something they called anti-Semitism, which told me, and I consider myself full Jewish, so does tradition. My mother is one of those Jewish people that was supposed to be protected, right? Because they were assumed to be raped or mishandled or something. So as opposed to other religions, even we illegitimate folks, right, in the Jewish tradition have full authority by virtue of our mother, okay? And by the way, I lost my mother's whole family in Lithuania in the Holocaust that is now used against us. I went back to Lithuania. I went to Germany to see my German relatives. I spent a lot of time after college on this issue. I don't need lectures about it. But the fact of the matter is, not only did Congress accept this, but just a few weeks ago, Gavin Newsom, somebody I really like a lot personally, his father actually helped us at Ramparts, signed a bill, forget the number of it, 7-something, AB, setting up a czar to enforce that we not be anti-Semitic, and they have implicitly, as Congress explicitly, accepted the ADL definition of anti-Semite being someone who criticizes the government of Israel. And so my right as a Jewish person, raised by my Jewish mother and Rabbi Bierman and others, to say that as a Jewish person, as by the way, many Jewish voters in New York showed, that's the great thing about this election, that a city, that such a large Jewish population would elect, by a solid majority, someone who is being derided as this Muslim and so forth and so on. To my mind, that is the most promising thing that has happened in this country. It has, I think, really undermined the idea that there's some kind of monolithic Jewish group. No. The fact is, Jewish voters made his victory possible. And they asserted what is in the parable of the Good Samaritan, that all lives matter equally, that religion and your ability, and according to the Constitution, my ability, anybody's ability to define what meaning Jewish or yours, that constitutional protection was put in place to protect the folks in this room from the Episcopalians. Think about it. Why was that in the Constitution? Because there was a notion of what Christianity meant, was that if you didn't believe in the Church of England, right? Tell me, Reverend, am I speaking?
You're right. You're right.
Let's get some response, so one of them other kind of churches.
Yeah.
Okay? The reason that it's in there is to prevent the Church of England and its remnants from telling people what it meant to be Christian, and that they cannot dictate it. So where in the world does Gavin Newsom get to sign a bill where he's going to tell me and agree with the ADL about what it means to be anti-Semitic if we dare criticize Israel? That is now the law in as far as the schools in California. They're going to tell a teacher in the high school, and by extension at UCLA, that if you argue, as Rabbi Behrman would have argued, that not respecting the rights of Palestinians to have a vote, about their future, not respect their connection with the land or their history, and that if you challenge anything that some people that I consider to be fanatics around Netanyahu, he might just be an opportunist, but he's certainly aligned with people who are absolute fanatics. on their view of religion. You're going to tell me that if I challenge them that I am anti-Semitic, and you're going to take away my right to teach or to express myself, you could not have a more serious challenge to what the spirit of religious freedom is. And whether it comes, this is my key point here, just so that I can lose whoever might still like me at this point. This is my key point. It comes from both parties. You know, what Gavin Newsom did might be a little bit better than what Trump did, right? He got rid of language that said any criticism of Israel. But the fact of the matter is, they've weaponized human rights. They've weaponized the concern. So instead of our being able to have a serious debate, discussion, examination of whether genocide has been committed against the people of Gaza, or if not genocide, war crimes, or denial of their fundamental rights, we're not allowed to do that if you're a high school teacher, even examining the issue. So if I take, as a teacher now, if I take the speeches of the new mayor-elect of New York and bring them into my class to examine, I have to worry, if I'm certainly at UCLA, I happen to be at a private institution, but they can be worse than these things, I would have to worry, or a high school teacher at a high school near here, I have to worry about whether I have a job, right? And that has gone unexamined in this case on the Democratic side, and not all that examined on the Republican side. So I'm sorry if I took advantage of your hospitality.
No, not at all. It's
Okay,
been rich and informative, and you answered the question I was going to ask, that the significance, you started with this good trouble notion, which I think is beautiful, and Mandami refused to capitulate. He refused to concede any quarter in regard to his statements being anti-Semitic, and he still won. And so what is the significance that he could say the things that he said, not back down, and still get elected in the city of New York? What are the implications of that for the rest of the country? Because New York, granted, is a unique place.
Okay, I got to keep it short now because I do want to get the question, but because there's so much. One, you can count on the Jews to be for human rights. It's in our DNA. That's a diaspora people. I have yet to find, I keep hearing we're not creating safe space in the university. I have yet to find that. I don't believe it. You know, I mean, yes, there could be isolated cases. That's the excuse. But the fact is, I do not know a single Jewish person that exists. Some of my best friends are Jewish. You know, sometimes my only friends are Jewish. But the fact is, I don't know anybody. I know they exist. But, you know, I recently spoke at a memorial for a very prominent Jewish lawyer, Dan Siegel. There were members of his family who are very strong Zionists. There were other people there. But I don't know of anybody who's Jewish who's not troubled. No, sorry. Not troubled by what's happening in their name in Israel. It's just a denial of the whole experience. What does it mean to be in the diaspora? It means being a kid in New York, being told I killed Jesus. We obviously want tolerance. We obviously don't want religious fanaticism. The Jewish people were not primarily in the area of Israel, tilling the land. We were insecure people. That's the story of being Jewish. We need security. We need tolerance. We need freedom. We're only 12 million people in the whole bloody world. You know, look how easy it can be turned against us. What do we have? The reason that I mean, it's so strong to me. Growing up as a kid, I only knew poor Jews. I did not know billionaire. I didn't know what in those days we called a millionaire. I worked at Catskills. Yeah, I had some rich customers. I was a busboy, a waiter. But all the Jews I knew, personally, I mean, 98%, were garment workers. They're working, these jobs. So we weren't German Jews. They were better educated. So the idea that a people who have suffered so much because of intolerance, because of elitism, because of power, because of the ability of wealth to corrupt, and so forth, should now be the weaponized point of the arrow destroying American democracy is a great crime against the whole idea of being Jewish. It slanders the whole people. I think the vote in New York was a very, very large number of Jews, particularly young Jews, said not in our name. You're not going to saddle us with Cuomo, this corrupt figure, and you're going to do it in the name of a guy who wants to make life livable for ordinary people in New York. You're not going to use that as an excuse to cover Wall Street greed and tell us this guy's some kind of anti-Semite, ignore the main issues of the case, including, by the way he brought up Israel. Yes, Palestinians are human beings entitled to full human rights. Most of the world sees it now. And if you insist that being Jewish means we think human rights only applies to Jewish people, led by some Jewish people who are privileged, can give a lot of money to a campaign, you are feeding anti-Semitism in the most effective, unfortunately effective way that has been done in modern history. It's a terrible crime against the Jewish people.
Thank you, Robert. That was powerful. Absolutely. We're going to take a couple of questions. I'm just going to say this statement
I got nowhere to go. I got Amtrak coming in a few hours. So.
I want to say amen to your statement. I had a conversation with a rather important Democrat about Palestine, and I was just asking them to understand that, yes, October 7th was a tragedy, 1,400 innocent people killed, slaughtered, brutally. But 6 months after that, we were looking at 10,000 Gazans having been killed by the Israeli army. And the response to me was 1,400. I said 1,400, 10,000. He said 1,400. That's the wrong number. The right number is 6 million. And so what you were saying earlier was that he was comparing the 10,000 or 20, it didn't matter whether it went to 50,000 Palestinian deaths. He was comparing that to the 6 million of the Holocaust. And that's exactly what you were saying earlier today. And this is a Democrat that we support on everything else. Couple of questions before our afternoon is over. Yes. Fellow member of the Bronx community.
Yeah, graduate of Fordham Prep. How does journalism continue to evolve in order to remain as free as possible a press?
Well, because it's an interesting question. I can give you a lofty answer, I can give you a gut answer. But the gut answer is, some of us are just ornery by birth. And the best of journalists are really never going to be in it for the money, the prestige. They want to kick ass. And they want to, the best statement ever made about journalism, they want to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And, we're not clear who made that statement. We know A.J. Liebman's statement, what was A.J. Liebman saying? Oh, freedom of the press is only guaranteed to those who own one. The big problem that has happened for journalism is the ownership has changed. And I wrote, my last book was They Know Everything About You, and it's all spelled out in there. By the way, everything I've said is in one of these books. There's The Great American Stick-Up, if you want to know about what happened to the banking meltdown and so forth. But the real issue is the model is broken. You're not the customer anymore. They can get the readers of the LA Times without ever putting in an ad in there. They can get 14-year-old readers of any publication. And they do that by data mining. So your business model is broke. That's why my wife and my wife is the editor of Scheer Post. I grabbed the name because she didn't want to be associated with it first. She was busy elsewhere. But, we're stuck with it now. But we're a mentoring operation. Everybody who works for us, has come out of one of these, well, or actually right now they've all come out of USC. But we're trying to broaden that. But we believe that's why we do it for pro bono. But that's a hell of a way to try to run a business, pro bono, because most of the people who can afford to do that are super wealthy. So we do it on a more modest level. But it's going to persist. Journalism will be there. And I must say there's a real positive side. Monamni would not be the mayor of New York were it not for the much criticized social media of the internet. This is the old story, that's how the light gets through contradiction. It's water flowing. You will find a way. People know things are screwed up. They know they're hurting. And you can get solutions to them. Some of them are demagogic and evil. Some of them are progressive. Bernie Sanders survived to the degree that he did because of the openness of the internet. I know, because I was doing a publication then, Truth Dig, and we could get, those days the game was not as controlled as it is now. We could get very large numbers. So there's a free press in America. You have to battle for it. You have to fight for it. But the fact of the matter is, people don't want to be lied to. And when the facts keep coming up ugly, right, you see it all the time. You have an election. How did Trump win? At the end, he had these people, right, who could write these big checks, right? I mean, really big checks, right? Elon Musk, for instance, and in return, he gets to run the U.S. government. Now, he was going a little too far, so Trump had to push him aside. But could you imagine, I'll give you this large amount of money and you'll let me run the IRS? That's a fantasy fulfilled for some, really greedy rich guy.
Let's take one more question.
Can we take more? No?
They've been here for 3 hours, and I got to come back next week. You don't. One more question?
Oh, okay.
Yes, right here. Okay.
Recommendations for effective resistance.
Excellent question. Recommendations for effective resistance.
Remember, right, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And what I see now, and here I'll draw on the wisdom of my 89 years, about to be 90. We're going to beat them. We may not beat them every time. We can clap. But the we includes a lot of people who even now support Trump. But far less. And I keep pointing out to my wife, we live in a building where some of the people she likes did support Trump. I am accused by some people in my own family, because I put on my listening ears, of being an apologist for Trump sometimes. Drives me crazy when I hear this. But I do think we have to be objective. And, like, for instance, in the first Trump term, he played Roosevelt in a way that people don't understand. But what did he do? Faced with this pandemic, yes, he was late. Yes, he disparaged science. But the fact of the matter is, he realized, wait a minute, I'm going to be in trouble here. We're going to be in trouble because right now, if I don't do something, and yes, plenty of Democrats supported by mortgage relief. Remember, they did this incredible thing. Most people, their whole wealth is in their house, right? And what did he do? He went along with saying, we're going to have mortgage relief so that you don't pay your mortgage until the time you sell your house, right? And so you're not going to lose the main thing you're concerned about. You're not going to have to move out of your neighborhood, And it's a huge thing. It's a communist thing, socialist thing, right? Wild lefty thing. But he did it. The other thing is between three and four times, increased your unemployment insurance. Again, another wild socialist left thing. So, honey, I lost my job. Honey could be a male or female. You know, I lost my job, but you know what? They've increased unemployment, so it's not so bad. We're going to get a lot of it. Not only that, we're going to get government support for our small business. Selling on eBay, we'll get a thing. So he did all of that Roosevelt stuff. Everybody forgets that. He actually, and this is not an apology for this guy, but he also, in trade relations, improved, right, NAFTA. For the first time, I don't even know if he knows he did it, but there's a thing in there where for the first time they talked about labor pay. And if you're going to make a car in Mexico or Canada, you're going to sell in the United States, some 40%, I forget the figures now, had to be by workers who made over a certain wage. And if they weren't being paid, they could go to a local court, not an industry court, and demand their rights to that pay. So he, being a demagogue, and you see some of that in foreign policy now. You know, I'm not a warmonger, I'm a peacemaker. Well, of course, there's a lot of lying in that. But the fact of the matter is he is going to make a deal with China. And that deal is going to be better than the status quo. It's not going to destroy China, because then China will destroy us economically. You know, but he knows. Oddly enough, he knows that we are living in a multi-power world, right? He knows that other people now have cards to play, okay? That Brazil could sell its soybeans to China, right? And then it screws the American farmer. So he's got to make concessions, okay? And so there's a reality check. Unfortunately, the Democrats have been locked into a notion of America's always on top, you know, and that we can call the shots. And we really know what civil liberties are, and no one else does. And we can overthrow regimes, and it's okay. So, you know, but the reality of Trump is also coming through. The tariffs don't work, right? And that getting rid of immigrants, yes, you should make the immigrants legal. You should have the DREAM Act and go much further. Anybody who has worked in this country, and I don't care how long and how they got here, but they've been, you know, working and following the law, they should be made legal. That's not brain science. You need them. You got to open your borders much. When Trump's father became a citizen, a grandfather became a citizen, like my father, that we were the largest immigrant group in the country, German Americans. Why? Because they were white, the Anglo-Saxon majority, and but by the way, the Italians, my wife's family, they were called WAPs. Does anybody know why they were called? Did you ever hear WAP? Yep. Or Guinea? Yep. Huh? You didn't grow up near any Italians? Huh? Well, you had them in San Francisco, but they were mostly from northern Italy. But the reason why they were called WAPs, ask some Italian friends, without papers. They were a malign group because you didn't want them. You didn't want poor Irish either until Kennedy balanced that out. So this whole thing is not about Mexicans. It is because you're anti-brown people. But the fact of the matter is you needed the workforce, you need these people, and you got a sick thing going now where you're hurting industry, you're hurting agriculture, you're hurting the American economy. And you're trying to play the old scapegoat. If you want an analogy with the Holocaust, they're doing with undocumented people from Central America and Mexico what was done to the Jews. You're making them the evil force. They're responsible for your problems. It's not working. You know, it can't work in a place like California. It's why Gavin Newsom was able to get this vote. I have my problems with that vote. I don't like gerrymandering or anything else, but, you know, we schlepped down in the rain to file our ballot, not the rain, it was cold and dark and so forth, and the reason 4 million people voted for that, they know, you know, that the thing has got to change, and this guy is a wrecking ball, this Trump. So the long-winded answer to your question is he's not working. His polls are starting to tank, and because we have enough democracy, we have enough restraint, we still have enough separation of powers, we still have enough judges who can challenge things. We still have enough of states' rights to challenge the federal government. that truth and fact are coming out.
You just made me think of something. Last point we want to hear, will the Supreme Court strike down his tariff regime?
Supreme Court.
Strike down Trump's tariff regime, and that's what they heard last week. Will the tariff regime, will they strike down, say that what he's done is unconstitutional?
Well, first of all, I don't know my prediction. I'm always opposed to people who predict. I get things wrong quite often. But let me tell you about the Supreme Court. I'm sorry, it takes a little context. I'm sorry. You can leave, the bell is rung, but it might be on the midterm, so stick around for another few minutes and I'll cut class short a little bit next week. But seriously, I used to believe in Chief Justice Roberts. And if you pick up my book, The Great American Stick-Up, I actually celebrate him in there, if you want to, because on the question of privacy, he presided over some very important decisions and talked about the American Revolution being based on privacy. And that has a lot to do with the surveillance society we live in and the profit model of data mining and everything else. He has betrayed my confidence in him. You can send him a message. He might get alarmed and change his position. No. But the fact of the matter is, the Supreme Court has mocked the idea of separation of powers. By the way, Roosevelt did not believe in it either. He tried to pack the court. I mean, sorry, my brain goes there. But we need separation of powers. And the conservatives have lost the main thing they offered the nation. And this was true even though states' rights were misused to defend segregation. The fact is, there's a reason why you have states' rights. There's a reason why you have the separation of powers between the judiciary, legislative, state. And it all has to do with power corrupting and absolute power corrupting absolutely. And it has to do with the fear of the founders, not some foreign enemy, but they themselves would be the enemy, right? And remember, it was George Washington who warned us in his farewell address. This, I swear, I'll bet you there isn't a person who knows in this audience what George Washington said in his farewell address. I'll give you a hint. It was very similar to what Dwight Eisenhower said in his farewell address. Does anybody remember? What?
Make no entangling alliances.
Yes, but he put it more, yes, thank you, that's very good. But very good. But what he said is, beware the impostures of pretended patriotism. Now, why isn't that taught in every school? Here was the general, like Eisenhower. This is a good thing to have for Veterans Day. Here was this general hero, could do no wrong. He had saved us in the Revolution. He has 8 years to do it. And by the way, he wrote his farewell address as a result of exchanges with Hamilton, no Maverick. And he wrote in there, beware the impostures of pretended patriotism. They will use patriotism to take away your liberty. That was the story of the end of the Roman Empire, destruction of the Roman, city-state. It was this destruction of what happened to Greece, city-states. That war, the postures of pretended patriotism will destroy human freedom because it's the foreign entanglement. You have that correctly. The foreign entanglement that allow you to lie with impunity. The public can't check it out. You use national security. You intimidate people. Now, to answer the question, if I were to tell you my real fear about Trump, I think he's a little old for the game, but, we old codgers, unfortunately, can be very stubborn and hang in there like I've been doing. The great fear is that he will trump the Constitution using the war against China as the excuse. How he does it, I don't know. But the only thing that will save Trump, because I don't think his policies, and this goes to the tariff, if the court doesn't block him on, if they block him on the tariffs, they'll be doing him a big favor, because the tariffs have to hurt, or they already are, and they will destroy the economy. There's no question about it, and will be the end, by the way, of the dollar supremacy and everything else. That part is very clear. We've been having a free ride because of the claim of free trade. But suddenly now, this multipolar world where Saudi Arabia makes his own deal with Russia, so it doesn't work. That's why you still have the Ukraine war. China and India have been brought together in this period in a way they never were brought together before. Forget about fighting over their border. They're allies because of a multipolar world. People want to make their own history. They want to go their own way, not out of anger or meanness, but because they know their situation best, all right? And they want to make that, look what's happening. Interestingly enough, we talked about Jews today. You got two Jewish leaders in the world that clearly are not relying on Israel to give them security, right? That's Zelensky in Ukraine, right? And Scheinbaum in Mexico. Think about it, a woman in Mexico who happens to be Jewish, and she's extremely popular, not because she says we're only going to worry about Jewish people here in Mexico, but because we're going to worry about working people, poor people, right? And she's a great hero. Whatever you think about Zelensky, he's identified with the Ukrainian nationalism and their right to define themselves. These are two prominent Jewish leaders. And neither of them have been outspoken in support of Israel, by the way. So it turns out maybe Jews are not inherently an endangered species everywhere in the world. Maybe this is a canard, just to bring that up again. But I think the basic answer to your question, I don't count on the Supreme Court to do anything anymore. And it's odd, speaking in a Protestant church, it's odd because it's coming from Catholics. I don't get it. The popes have been, incredible compared to the people on the Supreme Court who claim to speak in the name of the Catholic Church, and including, by the way, our vice president, who goes over there, and claims to be a Catholic. My God, on these key questions of immigration, peace, the rights of Palestinians, you can go down the list, not all the issues, not gay rights, although there's been some modification, but welfare. Catholic bishops have been very good on welfare and American poverty and so forth, and then you got a Supreme Court that has never had this many Catholics, actually in direct violation of the teachings that have come from Rome through modern history. So once again, it illustrates, maybe it's a good point to conclude, people misuse religion. Don't blame God for what's done in his name, okay? That's an old message. Blame the people who speak in her name, okay? It's the misuse of any of these things. The misuse of Marxism, the misuse of Jesus' writing, the misuse of it all. It's basically greedy, secular people, using religion as a cover for their greed, their corruption. That's really the basic thing. Now, you got a small, isolated, impoverished church here. You got to keep it alive and going and keep this guy being able to eat. And by the way, I haven't mentioned his incredible wife and, his sister, is she? Gail, an incredible person. She has all the warmth and compassion that no, I'm just kidding. But she's marvelous, but seriously, it's small venues like this, which sometimes you think, what are we doing and who are these people? And we don't have any power. You're keeping the flame alive, right? And frankly, I meant what I said. If I lived here, I'd be in this church. I would. Maybe that's an endorsement that'll finish off the rest of the crowd, and you'll have to come live with me, Madison, again. But, we still have that room for you, so don't worry. You can bring the rest of the family. Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience and your time, and I'm sure that Robert will be glad to converse with any of you that want to speak to him personally. So if you'll come to wherever you can have access to folk. Thank you.